Is there anybody that meditation is totally new, or maybe even that was uncomfortable? That's okay. If you were like, I didn't show up for a meditation tonight, what is this all about? Hopefully throughout my talk you'll understand more about why we start with meditation and why we incorporate that in there. And a couple of things I want to start with. First, can we give a round of applause to that lovely lady right there who brought us here? Without her, we wouldn't be here. You know, I keep being reminded of, Miriam was sort of touching on this, of how important it is to just show up. You know, we were coming to the UK for the People's Reset in Bath, and then we got invited to do an event in Wales, and then we got invited to come to Denmark. This wasn't part of our plans, although I'm definitely enjoying being here. And if she hadn't taken the step to reach out to us to say, maybe we could put on an event, none of us would be here right now. And I think that's just amazing for us to really take that in and understand that the simplest things can lead to the biggest actions. None of us know what's going to happen after tonight, but there's a lot of potential in this room right now. Who looks around this room and sees people you don't know? Or you know, you see some old friends, but do you see anybody you haven't met? Anybody meeting new people tonight? Check that out. There's a lot of potential. That's beautiful, right? The reason I enjoy doing these talks, and Miriam and I have done some tours across Mexico and the US, and we keep getting invited more and more places. You know, I'm going to speak for about 45 minutes or so, but it's really not about me. I appreciate that you came here to meet me, or if you know my work. But what really truly matters is each of you in this room. Because on Monday we're going to go back to London, and then we're going to fly back to the US, and we're going to go back to Mexico. And I'm going to continue on my work, but what really matters is each of you here getting connected, so that you start to build local community, whatever that looks like. I can't tell you, I can share some ideas, but obviously I'm not Danish, I don't know, what suits you guys best. It's up to each of you to decide what comes out of tonight and what the future looks like. But if we remember that it's all about just taking those first steps, then we can see there's so much potential, right? She took the first step to reach out to me. We've been getting to know each other. We're putting on this event. And let's, please, another round of applause for the hotel for welcoming us. So lovely food and everything. If none of us took those first steps, we wouldn't be here for whatever we're about to experience. And I have some notes, but usually I just like to speak from the heart. And I want to also just preface this by saying, sometimes when I get excited I talk fast, so I apologize in advance. And also, if I say anything that is just because I come from America, please take no offense. I don't mean to offend anybody. I don't mean to break any cultural norms, although sometimes it's necessary to do so, I think. So yeah, I just wanted to start with that. It's important for us to show up. I'm going to share a lot of different ideas, and I understand that the ideas that I've been working on for the last decade plus, but really the last 4 years, right before COVID, 1984, that's what I call the last couple of years. I developed these ideas based on my life in the United States and in Mexico. So I understand if some of the things, the solutions and the ideas I suggest, if they don't perfectly translate over to Denmark. But I want to work with you guys to figure out how do we adapt them to your environment, to your needs, to your community. And that to me is the really exciting part. My work has now been translated into Spanish, into German, French. Japanese is coming out next year, and that whenever I meet other activists from other countries and they say, we took your ideas and now we're using them this way, or these ones don't work perfectly but we changed it in this way, that's beautiful. I'm not here to claim that any of the solutions that I have used in my life are the perfect answer or the only answer or anything like that, right? So I want to make that clear. I think we all come from different backgrounds and each of us have a piece of the puzzle to offer. I personally believe that the solutions are not going to be found in politics. And when I say solutions, I mean the solutions for, well, let's start here. Who is familiar with the term Agenda 2030? All right. Keep your hands up for a second. Let's see. Who's familiar with the term technocracy? All right. I think some people might have experienced it firsthand. Who's familiar with digital IDs? All of you, right? What is it called? My ID? Is that what the program is called? Okay. So, and I just want to spend a moment on that for a second. Like, we mainly live in Mexico. We live part-time. We go to the U.S. where our family's at in Texas. And these are things that we are adamantly fighting against to make sure that they never become implemented. And I realize that as we travel, we're going to places where they're already implemented, or at least the beginning stages of them are, right? So, and honestly, that's kind of scary. I know that those things can become normalized, we become used to them. But I hope that tonight we can really brainstorm on how to help you guys figure out lives that are not dependent on those systems. Because as we found out during COVID-19 '84, the more dependent we are on those systems, the easier it is to squeeze us, right? I tend to feel like if you're 100% dependent on the government or the grocery store or any external system, that is a vulnerability that can be used against you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I also understand, again, that the United States and the Mexican government are completely different from what you guys are used to here. And we could debate all day about which is better and this and that. But as you may have seen on my shirts out there, I'm an anarchist. I think that and all that really means, it doesn't mean that I'm one of the people who think the answer is to throw bricks through windows or something like that, or that I believe violence. To me, anarchism, or what we more specifically call voluntarism, and I'm going to explain more of these terms in a bit, it simply means that I believe all of you here are beautiful, powerful enough, and capable enough of organizing your own lives, and that if we sit down together and we have conversation and dialogue, that we can create voluntary and consensual relationships. And in fact, right now we are all participating in a voluntary relationship. As far as I know, nobody forced you to be here tonight. If so, I'm sorry, I don't know why, but hopefully. But as far as I know, we're all here. We chose to be here. So we're in the middle of a consensual relationship right now. I'm speaking some ideas to you. You're going to come share your ideas with me. We're going to hug. We're going to smile. Nobody's forcing us to be here. And at the end of the day, I think most of us believe all human relationships should be done that way. Is there anybody here who thinks that people should be forced to do things they don't want? Okay, I think I'm in the right room. But when we look around at our world, a lot of the relationships are actually involuntary. Mainly the relationship we have with government. I know that, again, the governments are completely different, but personally, from my perspective, even if the government is doing good things with the money that it takes from your pockets, it's still taking it involuntarily. If you chose to say, no, thank you, I'd like to keep 100% of the money I make and keep it in my community, or keep it for myself and my land and my family, I assume the government would eventually come knock on your door and say something, say hello. That's how it operates in the U.S. at least. We have this lovely agency called the IRS, and if you don't give them their extortion fees every April, they will come take your property, or they'll come lock you up in prison. That doesn't seem to be very voluntary to me, right? So the world that I work towards is one that is based on voluntary and consensual relationships. And as I have gone down the path of research, as I said, it's kind of led me to believe that whether or not government is necessary is a whole other debate. What we can say for certain is that it absolutely operates at an immoral level. Again, whether or not we look at the fruits of its actions and say, hey, but it's doing these good things, that's all fine. The point is, the way it does those things is essentially with a gun to the head. You know, and I know that might sound extreme, but as I said, try to say no, and then you'll find out what happens, right? And during COVID-19 '84, we found out what happens when you say no to government. Did anybody here experience any personal hardships, whether that was losing jobs, losing friends, family? Hands are going up now. Yep, okay. And it was different in different places around the world. I was refreshing my memory in preparing for this talk, and actually I saw that I sent Miriam a message in March 11th, 2020, saying Denmark just passed a law, a quarantine law. There, you know, I was starting to tell her, like, things are starting to happen around the world, and Denmark was one of the first places to do that, as you guys obviously know. And that to me sounds like a really scary, aggressive thing to do. Tonight we're going to focus on the solutions mainly, but I think it is worth to at least kind of reflect on what you guys have all lived through, what we all lived through in different places. I mean, we moved to Mexico because we knew what was about to happen. And for us, that ended up being the right move, because Mexico ended up being the only country in the world that didn't have forced quarantines, forced shots, forced tests, etc. And one of the benefits of being in a third world developing nation is that it's a lot easier to forge government documents. I heard a rumor of that. I don't know personally. So I heard a rumor that there was a whole market for fake PCR tests, fake vaccine cards, And somebody out there was making these things and helping people travel freely.
We did too.
Yeah. Great, that's good to know. But as you can understand, the more systems become digital, the more difficult it will be to do those things, right? So voluntarism, what I'm going to also talk about tonight, I call exit and build. We'll get more to this in the details, but essentially it's the idea that if you recognize that there are systems around you, whether that's governmental systems, corporate systems, personal relationships, jobs, etc., that do not align with your values and your principles, that we choose to exit from those and build new parallel systems. As I said earlier, I don't think that the answers are going to come from politics. I also don't think storming the Capitol or violence is the answer or things like that. And I also don't think apathy is the answer. Has anybody here had friends or family who are awake but are just completely apathetic and doing nothing? Or this term you might have heard it, black-pilled, things like that. And it's okay if maybe you feel that way right now. I think we all might go through phases of being like, wow, we're totally screwed. There's nothing we can do. Everything's hopeless. I get it. We're facing some monumental circumstances here. But I don't think that those are going to lead us anywhere that we haven't been, right? Instead, I focus on exiting and building. So it's about building parallel alternative systems outside of what I call slavery systems. And to me, if you keep your money in the banking institutions, and I know this is a lot tougher out here than some other places, the banking institutions, if we maintain a complete dependence on government, we will be swept up into these slavery systems. You can be awake or whatever you want, but lately I've been trying to remind people that being awake doesn't feel like it's enough anymore, because you can be awake and still walk right into the quarantine camp, because guess what? You knew what was coming and you chose not to do anything about it. You knew that you needed community. You knew that you didn't want to be 100% dependent on these people, but instead of putting the time, the money, the energy, the effort into it, you just complained about it on the internet. Hey, and I like to complain on the internet just with the best of them. But we also need to take action in our own lives. And again, like I said, I know I'm going to share some ideas that might not translate perfectly well, but the key tonight is for each of you guys to go home with new friends, new connections, and new ideas to get organized in your community. Because who also, by a show of hands, is aware that this isn't over yet? Right. And I mean that in both ways. I mean that we're not done yet. We're not done building the beautiful things that we're going to build. And the psychopaths, what I sometimes call the predator class, are not done yet either. It could come in the form of a new pandemic that Bill Gates has been warning about for a couple of years. It could come in the form of economic calamity. It could be war. It could be this. Have anybody noticed they're talking about aliens a lot lately? I don't know what it is. So whatever the next big thing is, the point is these people have a lot of plans. And I actually just came back from the United Nations about a week and a half ago. I was there. Has anybody heard of the Summit of the Future or the Pact for the Future? Not enough hands there. I encourage you can go visit my website and learn more about it. I've been reporting on it for the last year. If you heard about the pandemic treaty, the pandemic agreement, very similar, but this one went under the radar, not so many people paying attention to it. I was there at the United Nations headquarters in New York City the day before nearly every single country in the world signed the Pact for the Future. And the Pact for the Future is just another step for these people to take control over your national and individual sovereignty. And I'm sure you guys are noticing that most of our governments around the world have completely sold out. They're not representing us as people, they're representing other interests, right? So whatever's coming next, let's be aware of that, but let's also not live in fear and be paralyzed by that fear, right? I think that's sometimes what happens in the freedom, truth, conspiracy, whatever you want to call it, movements, is that people, they look at what's happening and they think, there's no way we can ever do anything about this. It's hopeless. I might as well not even try. My friends, I'm here to say that that is the wrong path to take yourself down. I think there is absolutely a lot we can do. And let me emphasize this, that even if I believed that we were going to fail at trying, I would still be here telling you to try. Because it is not just about us. I can see that we have a range of ages in this room. I'm 39 myself. But how many people in this room have kids? Nieces, nephews? That's what it's really about. Those are the ones that it's really about. And your kids' kids, and their grandchildren, the people that we are never going to meet, the coming 7 generations and beyond, are 100% depending on us. The world that they are going to be born into is 100% dependent on what we do or don't do. If we choose, I mean, everybody in here said, yeah, I know what Agenda 2030 is, I know what technocracy is, so we can't claim ignorance, at least not the people in this room, maybe some of the people out there, although I'm sure you're trying to reach them. We can't claim ignorance. We know what's happening. And so imagine driving in your car and you see that there's a train wreck ahead, and you're driving towards it, and you know it's coming, but you choose not to act. And it's getting closer. I'm just going to complain on the internet about it. Maybe that'll do something. And the internet, of course, is a tool. That's how we all got here. It's a way to wake people up. But we can't be dependent on that. The answer, the true answer, is right here in this room. Those future generations are depending on each and every one of you right here in this room to say, okay, it might take some time. It might take some energy. It might take a little bit of my money. You all spent time, energy, money to come here tonight, but it's worth it. And here's another thing. I encourage you to get past the idea that you can only work with people who agree with you on everything. Right? I know that's difficult for some people to understand, but look, guys, we're facing the future of a free humanity or a future of an enslaved humanity. And that might sound a little, too intense for some of you, but that is really what is at stake. And that is not just in Denmark. It's in the UK, it's in Mexico, it's all over the world. And there are people all over the world just like us right now trying to think of solutions. So one thing to remember is you're not alone. Remember that. Hold that space and recognize. Look around this room with these beautiful people from your own country who are just as concerned as you guys are. The future generations are depending on us to step up to the plate and do something about this. And we have to put our egos aside. We have to put our differences aside. That doesn't mean you have to change your views. You have to agree with everybody on everything. In fact, it's probably, in my view, I think it's great to learn from other people who have different views. I want to understand you. I want to get to know you. And I want to see the areas we disagree on and see if we can find common ground. So let's try to focus on that. This is my hope or my encouragement is that after tonight, each of you focus on what you can all do. What can you bring to the table? As Miriam said, what are you trying to get out of this? What are you trying to offer? Because there's nothing less at stake than the future of the freedom of your country and the future freedom for the children coming after us. Not only that, I know you guys are a proud people and you have a beautiful, rich history to be proud of. Well, your ancestors are still with you as well. And every single one of us who come from different parts of this planet, all of our ancestors had to go through blood, sweat, and tears to get us here, right now, in this moment, to be alive. And each of you have that, you have that Viking spirit within you. You've got all this beautiful history. The point is, you have your ancestors with you. And I personally believe if you choose to do nothing, not only are you selling out the coming generations, but we're also selling out our ancestors who had to work to get us here. And you sit with that how you like, but my point is that I take strength in that. When I walk in this journey, I've got my 6 nieces and nephews and their future with me. I've got my ancestors with me, right? And I think that collectively, as a planet and as just humanity, those of us who, for whatever reason, have quote-unquote woken up, you guys are the ones who are going to have to do it. I know you wish somebody else was coming along to do it for you, but I'm sorry. I'm not here to do it for you. She's not here to do it for you. You got to come together and do it. And I'm sure there are plenty of other people in this and that couldn't be here tonight, that maybe will see this recording later, who also have something to offer. So I just want to make that clear, that together we each have to step up to the plate. And we have to bring the best version of ourselves. Before I get into some of the mechanics of what I mean by exit and build, I'd like to share just a little bit more background about myself, really briefly if I could. Is there anybody here who has never heard of myself or my work, just got dragged here by a friend or something? It's okay. Cool. Awesome. I love meeting new people. So my name is Derrick Broze. I'm 39 years old. I'm originally from Houston, Texas in the States. And for the last 15 years, I've been working as an activist and a freelance investigative journalist. I've written a few books. I produce documentaries. I do public speaking. I organize an event called the People's Reset, which we just had in the UK. We do it every year in Mexico. I'll tell you guys more about that in a second. My website, my book series, as you can see by my shirt, is called The Conscious Resistance. And my awakening started in 2009. Anybody ever heard of a guy named Alex Jones? Okay, I'm not going to try to do my Alex Jones impression. I was going to go for it, but no. We're good. We'll all be better off without me doing that. So, being from Texas, you learn about Alex Jones pretty quick when you go down this path. I've got my own opinions about him. I don't really trust him these days, but I will admit he played a role in my early journey when I first started to, ask these kind of questions. 2009, I watched an Alex Jones documentary called Endgame, and again, love or hate that guy, go back and watch Endgame from 2006, and it's describing everything we're dealing with right now. So it was definitely something that like shook me from, you know, my normal daily life. And I wasn't really a person who trusted the government anyways, or I didn't really have any philosophical understanding, but generally speaking, I kind of grew up maybe like a rebel without a cause. Like I was, you know, a rebellious teenager, I was into punk music and things like this, but I didn't really think about it too deeply. But I watched one of his documentaries, I read a couple books, and within a week, my entire paradigm had been shattered, and everything I thought I knew about the world was gone. And I very quickly felt like I need to do something. Like I can't just know this and then go back to work and continue on my life. So I started putting posters up in my neighborhood. There's poison in the tap water. Do you guys have fluoride out here too? Yeah. Yeah? Oh my God, okay. We'll talk about that later. But within a day, somebody tore down my poster, and that got me excited. I was like, yeah, I gotta do it again. Put it up, put it even more up. I felt immediately compelled to take action. Like, knowing things are crazy wasn't enough. I need to do something. So I started an online blog. This is 2009. Started putting up posters around my city. And then very quickly that evolved into a real-world community called the Houston Freethinkers. And for 7 or 8 years, this was my daily life. I mean, every month we would do documentary screenings, there would be protests or marches, we would do skill shares where we get together and say, okay, let's teach our community members how to make their own soap or how to bake their own bread or whatever skills that we could offer with the goal of empowerment. It was always about how can we focus locally and empower each other, right? And when necessary, go out there and protest and march and confront the negative things going on. But it was very much focused locally because I realized early on that while the problems are massive, global, international, the answers are always in our backyards. The answers are always in our own communities. How do you think they're implementing Agenda 2030? At your school board, at your town council, at your city council. That's, they might announce it, okay, the United Nations signs the Pact of the Future, but they have no power yet. So who has power? The people in your communities. Those are the people who are going to implement these policies. So I very quickly realized we need to be as focused, as hyper-locally focused as possible, and I want to talk about solutions. I don't want to just talk about the problems. And so I was really blessed early on to have the opportunity to... Shilka? Cool. I was very blessed early on to have the opportunity to put all my energy into the local community, and we were starting to get attention on the local media. It was great. They called us a local group of conspiracy theorists. It was, we were getting all the attention, and from there, I continued on and eventually got into journalism because I realized, like I said, okay, they're calling us conspiracy theorists. These people they're not going to tell our story. We're going to have to tell our story ourselves. So I got a little camera. I started going around and confronting politicians and going to city council and going to press conferences and doing all that stuff. And that's led me to doing everything I'm doing now, writing books. I'm a full-time journalist. I write articles on a weekly basis and written books and stuff. That was my political awakening, conspiracy awakening, if you will. But I actually feel like my first true awakening happened a couple years before that. In 2005, I was 20 years old, and I got addicted to drugs in Texas. And I ended up being sentenced to prison the week before I turned 21. And it was in that space where I got sentenced to prison, and I ended up doing 19 months in Texas state prisons between 2005 and 2008. I got sentenced for a year, got out for a few months. I played that game before I finally kind of figured out what I was trying to do. And it was in that space where I really started to wake up. This was before I knew anything about conspiracies, knew anything about what the government was up to. It first happened on a spiritual, emotional level. When I got locked up, and I don't know if you guys have ever experienced something like this, but it's this feeling of complete powerlessness where, imagine this 4 walls here, from one moment to the next, you can't leave until somebody else tells you it's time to leave. You can no longer use the bathroom in privacy, you can't eat when you want, you can't go to sleep when you want. You're just completely stuck there. And for me, as powerless as I felt, it was actually the moment that I felt like I really finally found my true power. Because I come from a family of drug addicts and alcoholics. I spent my young life visiting my birth father in prison for his addictions. It was something that was very prominent in my life. And I knew right away, this is not the path I want to be on. There's something else for me. And I was determined, I need to figure this out. I need to figure out how did I get here and how do I never come back. And thankfully, I had two grandmothers who were huge spiritual influences in my life, and one of my grandmothers started sending me books on prayer and meditation and just trauma healing, and that's when I really started to like dig deep. I started journaling every day, started meditating in this place that is filled with fear and anger and all the things you can imagine in a place like prison. And that is when I really started to heal. And it's a journey that continues up to this day, of course, but that was the beginning of me starting to really wake up. And so when I got out after doing a couple of years of that, of doing this inner work and looking at the roots of, because for me, like a lot of people, I wasn't using drugs because I was necessarily having a good time. Maybe there was a couple good times in there, but mostly I was just covering up pain that I was dealing with, and I didn't have the tools to deal with it. So me using a bunch of drugs was my way to avoid all this pain I was feeling from my lack of relationship with my father. And as I started to do a lot of that healing, I could see like where it was coming from. So I got out October 2008. I'm now a felon in the state of Texas, and that comes along with all kinds of fun things like people judging you. You can't get an apartment here, you can't get a job here. But it was actually the happiest I'd ever been in my life. Probably for the first time in my life. I was 23 years old, and I felt like I finally was starting to know who I really was and starting to really experience joy. And that was my real first awakening. About a year later, like I said, I watched this Alex Jones documentary, all these other things happened. But I don't believe that would have happened without me going through that other experience first. And the reason I share that, and the reason we start with meditation, and the reason I call my work The Conscious Resistance, is because personally I believe that the true awakening is the combination of these two worlds. Yes, there are physical institutions, there are physical people and places, and we can point the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, these kind of people. But there's also this internal world that many times activists completely ignore or forget about. I call this the internal tyrant. Our doubts, our fears, our insecurities, and our limiting beliefs that sometimes hold us back and prevent us from being the best versions of ourselves. And as I said earlier, personally, I think right now, at this time and place in history, we need the best versions of all of us to step up to the plate and say, hey, here I am, I'm ready. What do we got to do? How do we build that better future we know is possible? And so for me, that's what the conscious resistance is. It's the recognition, the understanding, the realization that the struggle for a more free, ethical, and just world will not come from only confronting the physical institutions of power. It's the combination of bringing these two worlds together. And it took me a couple of years to really get that. When I got out and I started my activism, I basically had my activist friends, and we would do our marches and our protests and our, whatever we were up to. And I had my spiritual friends, and we would go to meditations or do our different things. But there was this sort of like double life I was living, because my activist friends seemed to be totally disinterested in spirituality or meditation. They're like, what are you talking about, you crazy hippie? I'm not going to meditation. Don't you know the government? This, it's like, okay, fine. Then I would go to my spiritual friends, and I would say, guys, did you hear about this new law the government's trying to pass? Did you hear about this injustice? And they'd say, don't talk about it. You're going to manifest it. Don't talk about it. Only good vibes here. And they would kind of put their head in the sand, plug their ears. You guys obviously know what I'm talking about. And I think that's a big problem in the spiritual community, honestly. But the other side, like I said, is just as guilty. They're like, oh, spirituality, whatever. That is. What do you think, we're going to solve the world by meditating? Yes, and we also have to do things. It's not a one or the other. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are very spiritually tuned in, but their feet are not on the ground. They're totally abstract, and they're just ignoring here, and then vice versa. So to me, the conscious resistance is kind of the bringing together. Does that make sense to you guys? It's bringing those worlds together. So that's why we start with meditation and we bring that in. And I just want to make that clear, because most of the solutions I'm going to talk about from here on out are focused on the physical things we can do in this 3D world. But I think all of it is underpinned by that work we need to be doing here, right? We can build new institutions, we can get out of the government, we can build new governments or put ourselves in power, whatever we think the solutions might be. But if we don't do that internal work, we're going to recreate the same problems. It might be 1 generation, 2 generations, 3 generations down the line. But ultimately, we will cycle back and recreate the same things. I'm a student of history and a student of revolutions, and every single person who thought they were a freedom fighter ends up becoming the very thing they thought they were fighting, because, well, now that I've got in power, there's people who want me out of power. So I'm just going to suppress their speech for a little while, and then I promise we'll get to freedom eventually. We're going to get there. So to me, I don't know what comes next, but I know we're capable of it. I know that, personally, I do believe that whatever your spiritual, religious beliefs, I believe that the creator of this world, this existence, put us here in this moment to rise to this occasion and to create something better. Take that how you will, but I know that that's what I'm here for, to connect with you guys and to figure out what comes next. Thank you. So, in 2019, I started writing a book called How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. I published it January 31st, 2020, right before COVID happened. And the book says nothing about viruses or pandemics or anything like that. It's all about the technological, the digital dystopia side of the world. I've written a lot about over the years about digital privacy, facial recognition, digital ID, social credit scores, all the fun tools that these people have at their disposal. And the reason I got so interested in that is because in 2013, when I was on my activism path, I actually was leaked some images from a Houston Police Department officer showing that I was under surveillance. Apparently, the Houston Freethinkers building community gardens was a big threat, and so they felt like they needed to put me under surveillance. And I was actually sent a picture of a classroom just like this, but imagine you guys are all police officers and someone took a picture from the back of the room, and there was a screen that had my name on it and the Houston Freethinkers on it. And I was sent 3 pictures and some information, and this officer, or whoever it was, basically said, let Derrick Broze know he sent this to another journalist I knew, and she passed it to me, and it said, let Derrick Broze know that he has an active intelligence officer following him around. So at that point I figured, if I'm under surveillance, maybe I need to understand, what does that even mean? I kind of understood, cops are watching me, but what does that really look like? So I focused heavily on what they call cell site simulators. This is basically a tool, I'm sure your police have it out here as well. It looks like a little laptop, and they can basically drive around and scoop up all the data from your phone, pictures, text, things like that. Heat detection, these are like devices where they can, imagine there was a police officer out there, they could point it at this wall and they could see the heat signature from all of our bodies. Just all kinds of fun toys that they've used your tax dollars to purchase and buy for your safety. I promise it's just to keep you safe and to fight terrorists and all those kind of things. So I started learning about these tools, and I wrote this book like I said, I wrote it in 2019, published it in 2020, and it was partly a warning saying, hey guys, there's bad things on the horizon, maybe we should think about it. It was also partially a history of the technocracy movement. Some of you raised your hands earlier if you're familiar with technocracy. I'll provide a brief definition for those who aren't. So this was a political movement in the 20s, 30s, and 40s in the United States, in Canada, and some parts of Europe that was a response to the Great Depression and some of the economic situations happening back then. And basically these thinkers said, we need to get rid of the capitalist, the business class, because they're causing problems. We also need to get rid of voting and democracy because the people are too dumb to know what's best for them. And instead, we need to use machines. Now, they're writing this 100 years ago, right? So they didn't have the term artificial intelligence yet, as far as we know. But they were saying what we need is sophisticated machines that could detect, okay, there's 100,000 people in this city. That means they're all going to need a little bit of wheat, a little bit of corn, and just allocate the resources efficiently. And basically they promised it was going to be utopia. This would be the way to create a better world. Get rid of the business people, get rid of voting. You're going to have what they call the technate. I call it the technocratic state. And they said that this technate would be run by the technocrat king. And that this technocrat king and his engineers and experts, the technological experts, scientific experts, would manage all of society, centralized management of society. And again, they promised it would be a utopia. Now, has anybody heard this familiar phrase of trust the experts in last recent years? That comes right out of the technocratic philosophy. Now, if you were to go to Wikipedia right now, it'll tell you that this technocratic idea, it faded into history, it's not relevant anymore, nobody follows it. But I believe, and I think it's been proven correctly, that this is the exact philosophy that is guiding most of our governments right now. They think we are too dumb to know what's good for us. And again, I know that in your country, there might be some things that you consider positive that the governments have done. But ultimately, in the U.S., we call it a nanny state. Like they think you guys, all of us, are too smart to know what's best for us, so we should have them managing our lives. This is also the idea of the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, what they promote. Klaus Schwab calls it the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the Great Reset. All of these ideas are very much based on this technocratic idea that we should have the technological and scientific experts managing society for the best of us. Now, to believe that, you would have to assume these people have your best intentions at heart. And personally, I'm kind of doubtful about that at this point in time. But that was what my book was about. It was partially saying, look out for this technology that's coming, but also understand this philosophy that's really guiding them. And then most importantly, it was, as the title implies, a sort of how-to guide on how can we consider avoiding these systems that are coming very quickly. And I know some of them are already here in your country. This is where the idea of exit and build comes in. So like I said earlier, the idea is that we want to exit from slavery systems before they completely trap us in them, because the further you guys allow the digital ID thing to go, and the further you get your life ingrained with it, it is going to be more and more difficult to get out of it. Some of you might already be experiencing this. So in one way, the exit and build idea is about physical location, which I know some people in here are already doing. So imagine like you live in Copenhagen and you're like, the city's just getting more expensive, it's getting more restrictive, there's more freedom in the countryside or something. I want to get some land with other people. And I mean, land's expensive in the U.S. I know it's expensive out here. We work together with a community of people and put our money together to get land because, it's not something I can just buy by myself. But the idea is that maybe you exit from a physical location and you move to a location that you think will be better for liberty and privacy in the long term. One example of this would be so many people from the UK, from Canada, the US, Australians who could get out, Germans came to Mexico, some who stayed and have built a new life there, but others it was just like, my country's crazy right now, I need to get away and see what happens. That's an example of exiting and building in terms of physical location, right? But also I discussed it in terms of philosophically and practically. So I'll give you a few examples. And back to my shirt being holistic anarchism, or what I call holistic activism, I like to think in whole systems. Does everybody here understand what the term holistic means? Feel free to shout out what it means to you. Anybody? What does holistic mean to you?
Mind, the body, the spirit, everything.
So
balance.
All inclusive, right?
Yeah.
So holistic. Now it's interesting because at least in the States, this is one of those terms that has been so watered down that when you go to the store, they have holistic dog food, they have holistic washing machines. But it actually does have a meaning, and it means dealing in whole systems, right? So in some ways, like if you're studying something and you just focus on one piece of the puzzle, that's going to give you a certain perspective and certain bit of data. But if you say, let me study this whole system, so for example, with environmental science, like you might just study the lakes and the rivers and the water bodies, right? And that'll give you something. But then if you take the whole system of the planet, that's going to give you a totally different perspective. I tend to feel like our activism is very reactionary. They do something here, we run over there and protest against it. They do something over here, we come over here and protest that. They are controlling our energy, they are guiding the game, and we're just responding. Holistic activism, or this exit and build philosophy, is about looking at all the different areas of your life. So you could start with food, economy, your money. You could look at technology, we'll talk about that in a second. You could look at healthcare, education, and it's up to you how deep you want to go. But the idea is that you look at each of these areas and you see what are your weaknesses and your vulnerabilities in these different areas. I'm imagining that you guys had, was the vaccine passport required to get into your grocery stores? No? Okay, good, at least they didn't go that far. There was definitely, what about masks? Did they try to push, okay, so that's, unfortunately, was the new normal. That was part of it, right?
Well, you could excuse yourself.
You could, okay, good. Some places I remember friends in Italy were telling me just right away, it went like, you couldn't leave your house without a permission slip to walk the dog and things like that. So if you saw the way that your governments treated you during COVID, focus on the various areas that they really went after you, whether it was the vaccine passport or other areas. I think we need to take lessons from there, because whatever comes next, they're going to use those same strategies again. Now, next time it might not be about a pandemic, it could be about your carbon credits, and you drove too much this week, or you ate too much meat, or whatever it is, right? You guys understand how climate change is becoming part of the agenda? Is that familiar to many of you here? Okay, so it doesn't really matter what it is. The goal is technocracy. They're going to try 10 different ways to get us there. And it probably will look different country to country. But ultimately, look at those different areas that your country, your government's tried to come at you, and those are the areas we need to strengthen, because those are our weaknesses. So, for example, in Texas, we didn't have it nearly as bad as some of the other places. They did require masks for most businesses. If you worked for the city government, things like that, they did require them to get vaccinated, but it wasn't like a public thing. So if I was living there and I was working for city employee, and I was taking this exit and build philosophy, I would try to think, okay, how can I make sure I'm not dependent on this job for my very future? And I know that's difficult, especially if you've been working somewhere for a long time, and you're like, I built my whole life here, I've got a pension, I'm going to retire soon. The idea of just quitting and finding a new job sounds kind of crazy. But at the same time, how much do you want to be free? I mean, I think that's what it really comes down to, my friends. I think ultimately we might have to change our lifestyles. We might have to sometimes move. We might have to find new relationships, friends, unfortunately, sometimes even family. And as I said earlier, we might have to work with people that we thought we could never get along with if it means staying free. To me, staying free, and I don't even mean just kind of like, okay, I'm free to live in a 4x4 box, but I can't actually go out anywhere and express myself freely, without fear of hate speech laws or something like that. To me, that's not freedom. That's just accepting something less than that. So the first thing in this holistic thing would be to decide, what does freedom really mean to you? I can tell you guys my definition based on my experience in the U.S. and Mexico, but I would encourage each of you tonight to go home or this coming week and to spend some time on that. What does freedom really look like to you? Maybe you don't mind dealing with the digital ID. Maybe you're like, oh, it's not a big deal for me, it's convenient, whatever. That's up to you to decide. Personally, I don't want to go down that road, right? So decide first, what does freedom really look like to you? And once you understand what that looks like, then you can understand what you're willing to do to get there. You start looking at your life and say, okay, well, if I'm ever going to get to this free place over here that I desire, currently I'm not free in this area, I'm not free in this area, or I'm dependent on this, or I might be weak here. If they bring back the vaccine passports, I'm not growing any of my own food, I don't know any local farmers or growers, I'm 100% dependent on the big corporations. That's a weakness, right? And again, I'm not here to judge anybody. I'm just saying that those are things maybe we want to individually and collectively as communities start focusing on. So when you take this exit and build idea, you look at these different areas. Let's talk about technology, because I feel like this is one of the most easy, but also one of the most challenging ones. In many ways, when it comes to technology, we are voluntarily giving up our own privacy and our own freedoms, right? How many Gmails we got in this room? That's one sign. It's okay. Again, no judgment. This is a reflection for us to say, what can we do better, right? It's not a judgment. This is a huge problem. Now, for me, I think it's a problem morally and principally. We can go on and on about all the problems with Google, but the number one thing that I think most of you guys know is that they're censoring people like myself and some of you out there, right? Why do we want to give these people our data, our time, energy, when we know what they support? Google also is willing to build a censored version of the internet for the Chinese citizens. They're building this Dragonfly program, which is a drone program you can look into. The Lavender AI program, which is bombing Palestinians. Like, we could go on and on and on of what these people are involved in. Apple, we could list the big tech companies. We know that there's reasons we want to avoid them. And yet they've monopolized so much of our world that you can't go to the local their local electronics store and not find an Amazon, an Apple, and Microsoft, etc. You have to go out of your way to try to find alternatives. But the beautiful thing is, alternatives do exist. You're just not going to find them in the mainstream. Just like you're not going to find the truth on the mainstream news. You got to go out of your way to look for it. So you could, though, choose to stop using Google as a search engine. Like right now, everybody in this room could just say, all right, I'm going to use Presearch, or I'm going to use CRX, or DuckDuckGo. I think DuckDuckGo is a better alternative, but they were also censoring during COVID as well, in case you hadn't seen that. They were definitely lowering certain search results. The point is, alternatives do exist. There's a website called nomooregoogle.com. Nomooregoogle.com. You can go there right now, and it'll show you alternatives to Docs, Sheets, Gmail, everything that you might be using for your businesses. There does exist an alternative. Another website is privacytools.io. Privacytools.io. Same thing. It's going to show you all these. I'm not paid by any of these companies, by the way. These are just alternatives that I encourage you to do your own research and decide what works for you. Privacytools.io, nomooregoogle.com, takebackourtech.org. Now that's a friend of mine's website. Hakeem Anwar, he is the founder of the Above Phone, and him and his company, they create de-Googled privacy phones and laptops that come preloaded with decentralized open source apps for everything you're doing. So instead of the Google Maps, you've got Organic Maps or Magic Earth. Instead of YouTube, you've got NewPipe. And these are all open source alternatives that allow you to access the same information, but without logging in, without taking your data, And so my point is that this is just one area. If we're thinking holistically, you start to go through these different areas of your life. How can I improve my food situation? How can I improve my economics? How can I improve in technology? And the goal is not necessarily to get, I'm totally off the grid, out of the matrix by next week. It's going to take time. But again, if we don't start taking that first step that we talked about earlier, we're never going to get there, right? If we say, I hear what you're saying, Derrick, but I've got a lot of contacts on Gmail, my whole work is on Google Sheets, that's going to take forever to figure out. Well, I guess you just found out how much you want to be free. If that's the limitation for you, it's like doing a little bit of work or learning a new tool is as far as you're willing to go. That's something you might want to reflect on. For me, I think it's worth the effort, the time, the energy. And again, it's going to look different for each of us, what tools you want to do. I kind of like to, I'm kind of an extremist, they say. I like to push out on the edges a little bit. So I don't pay taxes in the United States. I haven't used a bank since 2008. Miriam uses the above phone. So whenever we're using a smartphone, we're using the above phone. We're trying to reduce the data that we're just voluntarily giving away from them, right? And this is the path that I've chosen. I'm not saying that's the only path. I'm not saying that's the path you need to be on. But I do think if we don't start taking these ideas of exiting from systems that are not going to lead to freedom and privacy and are already, I think, reducing our privacy. Because what is the My ID required? What other things? You told me earlier it's banking. What else? Is it required for anything or is it just optional?
Everything in society almost.
Okay, so name one thing. If I want to
buy a flight.
If I want to buy a plane ticket, I have to use it?
Yeah.
So there's no way to buy a ticket without it?
No.
That's insane.
Anything on the internet without it.
So that's an example.
You can't go into your bank account.
You have to have it both now.
See, this guy knows.
I don't have it. I might be one of the only people in this room who doesn't have it.
I don't.
Okay.
Okay, so there are people.
It's getting more and more difficult, and in a couple of years, it's going to be impossible to pay you.
That's exactly what I was saying earlier. So the further it goes, and the more you are ingrained in the system, the harder it will be to get out of those. But see, people like...
In a couple of years, just in a year maybe, you won't be able to pay your rent anymore.
Exactly. So that's getting dangerous.
Almost 20 years. We had something else before called Easy ID. It's basically the same.
So they've been prepping you guys for this for some time, right? And that's what I'm saying. Like, if I was to tell somebody this in the U.S., they're going to be like, "That's crazy. I'd never do that." But that's not a judgment. I'm just saying, like, these are the things we need to reflect on. So imagine as that gets more difficult, and you guys are saying it's needed for almost everything already. That means they know everything you're purchasing. They know your health data, all that stuff. You guys understand that. Now,
they actually changed it from the old system to the new system under the excuse that it was more safe, more secure.
That's exactly, so thank you. That's a great point.
But it wasn't.
So they're going to...
Basically a lie from one end to the other. It's not more secure, it's even worse than the old one.
By the way, it's Google's system that they're using.
That's not surprising. I mean, during COVID 1984, the contact tracing apps were made by Microsoft, Apple, and Google, right? So again, another reason you don't want to support those companies.
It's impossible to pay anything with on the dock. Yes, you have to have Google to pay because it's cancelled immediately.
Okay, so let's talk about the money then. I'm hearing now, I think, where the area should be a focus, right? Because if they've already got the majority of the people on the digital ID, and I imagine if I was to go talk to just the average person on the street, they would think it's okay, there's nothing wrong with this, and who cares, right? Okay, so you guys are already dealing with what many other countries are trying to avoid happening. Now, in the book, I talk about the idea of the counter economy, right? And it's not just money, but money's a big part of it. But the general idea, the term comes from the counterculture from the 60s. The idea is that essentially you guys are the beginning of the parallel system. As I said earlier, I don't think the answer is politics, it's not violence, it's not apathy. It's building new systems. And I know that might sound impossible or crazy or it's going to take forever, but again, if you guys don't even make the effort, so we have people who are living in communities trying to live outside. This brother back here is not even inside it yet right now. You guys need to start collaborating. How much of your business can you do outside of that system? Like, will people still take cash? Like, I'm going places and I'm paying for things in cash, right? So that seems to still be an option. They haven't completely outlawed cash here. So they can't track that, right? So maybe not yet. I get that. They're trying to do the chips in the bill. Yeah, they're doing that.
Huge limits to how much you can take out of your bank now.
So that's another big part of the problem.
If you're trying to take out a big amount, They're going to call you. They're going to ask you what you want to do.
Stefan, raise your hand, brother. Stefan. Yes. Who else in here, and I know that cryptocurrency can be controversial, but it's one of the potential solutions. I use Monero. This brother here is definitely, we talked earlier about crypto. Look guys, I'm being real. Look, it's crypto, Bitcoin, it's being co-opted. The Bilderbergers, all these shady people are getting involved. But just as an example, we just paid for our land with $20,000 and I used Monero to move it around. I didn't use any banks, I didn't use any taxes, I didn't pay anything on it. Using cryptocurrency, using specifically Monero. There's a couple people in here who have some awareness on that. I'm not saying it's the perfect solution, it's going to last forever, but one of the things I think is key, and I talk about this in my book, is we have to be adaptable. A tool might work for a little while, and then it doesn't work anymore. We have to, and I know that can be difficult, especially if you're really rigid and stuck in your ways on the way you're maneuvering. But if we don't at least try to figure out alternatives, it's only going to get worse. What you guys are describing is only going to get worse. So I would encourage, like each of you here coming from different places, you can create ways to exchange together goods, services outside of their hands. Like it starts with just simple things like that, because the more money that you're moving outside of their taxable, traceable, etc. system, the more it's staying in your pockets, it's staying in your community. And anything that you can keep them from knowing about, I think is a good thing, because the more they understand you, as you guys know, the more they understand you, it's not, maybe you're like, I don't care, Derrick, they can watch what I buy on the internet. But what it's ultimately coming down to is they're building profiles on each and every one of you. They're trying to understand who you are, what you are. In the most benign ways, they're going to show you ads and say, oh, you looked up a sofa the other day, here's a nice one for sale. But in the long term, especially when we get to social credit scores, these things are going to be used against you. You've been posting about horse paste on the internet. You keep posting conspiracy theories on the internet. And it will be used against you, and they will penalize you even further. If you're deep in that system, then they will put your bank account on hold. Then they will, say you can't go on a flight anymore. You can't get that job promotion. This is already happening in parts of China. It's already happening in parts of India. And you guys aren't so far from one of the places that went fully digital. Estonia has been like the model for this for years. They were one of the first places to really adopt and practice these things. So, as I said earlier, I don't claim to have the perfect answers, but I know that the answers are in this room with you guys.
But they actually also block your card. If you, for instance, had an incident, I was in South Africa in March. We tried to pay for the apartment, holiday apartment. The banking system kept closing the card and not pay the rent. No, your card is blocked. You cannot pay.
Did they say why?
They call it, it's the algorithms.
So we were talking about this earlier. The algorithms are already defining what you can and can't do.
Yeah.
That will only get worse once AI is implemented in that.
It was actually my daughter's credit card. First we tried with her grandmother's credit card. And it blocked, it closed, nothing could do. Then we tried with my daughter's credit card, and they kept blocking it. Third time she called the bank, and they said, but we cannot really do anything because it's the algorithms, because it's South Africa.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not allowed to go to South Africa. Oh, yes, of course, I know. Then she actually came with a solution, which none of us knew they had, but they have it. They have it.
What's the solution?
They can bypass your credit card from nets, meaning, yes, that no algorithms, it's touching your card, you can pay whatever you want to pay, it only is valid for 24 hours, and it's on your own risk. So if anyone is misusing your card, it's on your own risk. That's what they say, of course.
That's a perfect example of how they already have that control.
That was the only solution we had. If we wanted to go to South Africa, we had to choose that solution. So they bypassed her card for 24 hours. We paid the bill and went to South Africa. But I couldn't exchange any South African money in this country. No. We don't have that anymore.
Well, so one of the things that we were talking about earlier is that the more that they implement these algorithms, and especially artificial intelligence, which again is just another tool, it can be used for amazing things, but in terms of what we're talking about, it's going to be used to control. And once you take the human out of the equation, there will be nobody to ask, there's a problem here, they're just going to say, you've been locked out, that's what that is. And with the social credit scores, they'll say, your score is too low, you're going to have to wait to raise your score up. go do some community service, or stop posting on the internet, or whatever it is that they say. So you guys understand the problems. I'm going to conclude here in just a couple minutes, but I want to bring it back to a little more focus on some of the solutions ideas I have. It really is that community is key. Now, I've been involved in a project called the Freedom Cell Network since 2016. We started this idea, my buddy John Bush back in Texas, and the problem we were trying to solve is that, yeah, there's a lot of activists out there, but how many people have felt alone in their activism? And how many people, who came from outside of Copenhagen? Like, anybody drive? So quite a few people. And especially if you're in smaller places, a lot of times you feel like there's nobody else in my town that cares about these ideas. I'm the only crazy person out here. I was the only person protesting during COVID or whatever, right? What Freedom Cells tries to do, and the website is freedomcells.org, CELLS.org, and I'll just explain that terminology and the concept. The way we see it is it's like the cells in our body, right? Each cell is beautiful and powerful and unique on its own. It's performing its task, but it's also part of the larger organism, which is you and your body. And in that way, we call our groups cells, hubs, hives, circles. The name is ultimately irrelevant. Call it what you want. The goal, though, is that we build a Copenhagen cell here. We build another cell in this small town, another cell here. We do it in Mexico. We do it in Africa, in the U.S. And as each of us, as I said earlier, start focusing hyper-locally on what we can do in our own community, at the very least, having a support system. Like I mentioned earlier, being able to spend that $20,000 to pay for land, the only way I was able to do that is because I've been using crypto for a long time, so I've developed relationships with people that I can trust. I don't even need to use the internet. I can talk to them face to face, and I can transact. Those relationships are going to be key for us building this parallel system, or at the very least, trying to avoid it for as long as, what they're building for as long as possible. So using the freedomcells.org website, you can create a free profile, and you can put, here's my skills, I'm a welder, I'm a builder, I'm a meditation teacher, whatever it is that you have to offer. I'm interested in growing food, I'm interested in cryptocurrency, whatever your skills, whatever your interests are, and you can put your location. We don't want your home address, but just put, generally Copenhagen, whatever, and then it adds you to our maps. And then you can search the maps and say, show me everybody who lives within 10 kilometers of me. And it'll show you the people's profile. You can look at them. Oh, look, they sound like-minded. It's somebody who has the same interest. Let me message them. Let's go out for a coffee and get to know each other. You can also search the cell maps, and it'll show you all the groups that already exist. I haven't searched today, but I've searched in the past. There were people active in Denmark a couple of years ago. I don't know if they still are, but there are. Great. And
Not many.
Well, this is we're going to do a refresh. Tonight is a restart of that, okay? Is anybody here on Telegram, the Telegram app? Awesome. I created Freedom Cells Denmark tonight, and I'm going to pass it to her. She's going to send it to all of you. You can come over to our table if you want to get the link. Don't go away after tonight without connecting with each other, guys. Truly and seriously, you are all the answer. You guys know this country better than me. You know what will work and what won't work. But I do know it's each of you that are going to be the ones to do it. So I want to invite you all to either join the Freedom Cells website, add yourself there, connect with each other there, and I encourage you to do both, because some people aren't on Telegram, some people are on the website. We kind of do a little bit of both. Join the Telegram group, communicate with each other. I just started it. I'm going to hand it over to her, and you guys can do what you want for it. We just did this in the UK when we had the People's Reset. There's about 150 people in that group. Now they're organizing by Southeast, Southwest. They're getting more hyper-localized and organized. And I want to invite you to look at the website, too. Freedom Cells is a little different than some of the other groups you may have been a part of. It's not just meant to be another activist group that you get together and talk, and then after a couple of months you're like, okay, we're not doing anything, I'm stop coming. I understand. I've been a part of a lot of activist groups, and sometimes they're just talk, and there's nothing behind it. Freedom Cells has 5 principles. We are apolitical, we're nonviolent, decentralized, localized, and solutions-focused. So this is not another place to just post about politics in your country or to complain about this thing or talk about conspiracies. There's a million other places to do that. This is specifically a place that is focused on, at least this is the intention, and what it becomes is dependent on each of you. But the intention is to come together to talk about solutions. So you guys were talking about, like this brother right here could probably do a workshop on how do you live without the digital ID, right?
I think so.
It's difficult. I talk about this in my book. I don't know if I mentioned this, but you can download my book for free. We ran out of copies a couple days ago, but you can download it at theconsciousresistance.com/how-to. You can also buy it all the usual places. I encourage you to buy anywhere other than Amazon, but if you need to, it is on there. And in the book, I go much deeper. I talk about how I've lived without a bank, how I've lived with these different things. And it's not easy. Like I said earlier, you have to kind of be adaptable. There's times when I've tried to go rent an apartment, and I imagine it would be even more difficult here. When I try to go rent an apartment, and they say, okay, can you show me your payment history? Well, I get paid a lot through cash or crypto, and that's kind of hard for them to understand. Okay, can you show me your tax returns? I don't have those either. And then you throw the fact that I have a felony on top of it, that makes it even more difficult. So my point is, this is something I've had to learn to navigate. You might not have as many strikes against you as I do, but it can be done. And I'm not saying that's going to be everybody in here's paths. Again, I don't want to assume. I know everybody's coming from different backgrounds, and what I'm saying might sound totally crazy. All I know is that you need to figure out something, and it's going to come from everybody right here, and I'm sure there's other beautiful people who couldn't make it tonight. So step one, join the Freedom Cells Telegram, go to the website, put yourself on there, add a profile, and don't let the energy that's here tonight die down. Like, what's most frustrating to me sometimes is that we'll meet people, we'll come to these awesome events, we call them activations for a purpose, because I want to send you guys all home feeling excited and motivated, but then in a week, normal life continues, and 2 weeks pass, and a month passes, and then I see some people and I'm like, yeah, we never saw each other again after that night. Nothing ever happened again. Don't let that happen here, guys. I would love to come back in a year, reconnect with you guys, and besides doing a talk, let's go build some gardens, let's go collaborate together, let's go protest in the streets, let's go do something action-oriented and wake up more of your brothers and sisters that are here in this country, because they're out there, they just don't know you're here yet. And you guys can be the ones to lead the way and to show that even when things progress this far, even with digital IDs, there's still resistance. There's still people stepping up and saying freedom is possible even in a place like this. And I think that's what it's really going to take, because I can promise you, my friends, that those of us in the US and elsewhere who are terrified of these things happening are looking to places like this to see how you guys deal with this